Heidi Firkus, an everyday, God-fearing Christian woman, met a gruesome fate on April 25th, 2010, when an intruder broke into her Minnesota home, fatally injuring her and shooting her husband. However, it wouldn't end there, ladies and gentlemen. Her husband would survive and would remarry, only for his next wife to uncover a very dark secret. The twist will shock you. You won't want to miss this episode. Born on December 14th, 1984, in the beautiful city of St. Paul, Minnesota, Heidi Marie Erickson was the beloved daughter of John and Linda Erickson, her parents. She was also the sister to her two brothers, Peter and Joel. Now, Heidi was a person of deep faith, having just dedicated her life to Jesus Christ from a very young age, and her faith was a guiding light in her life, and she was very well known for her joyful spirit and love for God. Heidi was also very cherished by her family and had a wide circle of friends who all adored her. And come 2005, she would cross paths with a man by the name of Nick Firkus at their local church. And it wasn't long before the two would click, and soon they were like two peas in a pod and tie the knot. Now, Nick was born on February 25th, 1983, and was the son of Steve and Julie Firkus. Their love story was a testament to their shared faith and the deep bond they shared together. Heidi was a hardworking employee at Securion, which is a financial service firm, and Nick was an operations director at a carpet cleaning business. From the outside, the two were the perfect ideal couple. They had it all: a great relationship, lots of love, loving and supporting family. However, come about 2010, things didn't look so hot. Sure, they still had a great relationship, but things were beginning to get financially stressful because they found themselves on the brink of eviction from their home, because they soon found themselves in a sea of credit card debt of over 15 grand. They were drowning, looking for a way out. Now, Nick, of course, was very embarrassed by this dire financial situation and tried to do his best to keep it a secret from everyone. But eventually, the truth came crashing down. On April 25th, 2010, at around 6:30 in the morning, a 25-year-old Heidi would dial 911 from her cell phone, and in a very frantic voice, she would tell the operator that someone is trying to break into her home.
State Patrol 911.
Someone's trying to break into my home.
What city are you in? St. Paul?
I'm in St. Paul.
Hang on just a second. What address are you at?
1794.
1794 what?
911, where's your emergency?
State with
1794. Minnehaha Avenue.
Minnehaha. Someone's trying west? Somebody's trying to break in her house.
Now, of course, she's completely terrified by this ordeal, not knowing if she was going to survive, and she's breathing heavily, panicked, hoping that the police would get there in time, and abruptly, a noise happens and the call ends. Now, the operators are confused, they don't know what happened, and so very shortly after, about 65 seconds later, yet another 911 call is made. But this time, it's not Heidi calling back, it was her then husband, 27-year-old Nick Firkus.
State Patrol 911.
Please, somebody has broken out. You shot me.
Okay, are you in St. Paul, sir? Okay, let me get you right in there. Hold on one second. Okay, hold on a sec. Okay, they'll be right with you. Hold on 1 second with me.
911.
Okay, hi, this is the one on in St. Paul. Go ahead, sir.
No, sir. No.
Hello?
No.
Can you tell me where you are?
What?
Take a deep breath.
I'm 911.
And in it, he's telling them, oh my gosh, my wife has just been shot. Someone's broken into our home. I need help. I've also been shot. And so the operators are trying their best to calm him down. He's clearly out of his mind and in the throes of trauma, having just been shot by some intruder. And so the police officers quickly rush to the scene, and there they find two things. Nick, who had suffered a gunshot wound on his left thigh, and Heidi on the floor, dead. Now, it appeared that she had actually been shot and struck in the upper back, which had pierced her heart and lungs, which killed her instantly. Now, of course, in the throes of all this trauma, Nick was in complete and total emotional distress and shock. He was then taken to the hospital to be treated, and this, of course, is when the police began their investigation. And as they're looking around for clues, they noticed that it looks like any other ordinary home. The Ferguses' home was neat and tidy and clean. In fact, the entryway table by the front door was completely untouched. There were no signs of a struggle or forced entry. And in fact, Nick would tell Sergeant Jim Gray of the St. Paul Police Department that he woke up to a strange noise at the front door. And of course, fearing the worst, he grabs his shotgun from the closet. He's ready to protect his family with his life. And he told this police sergeant that as they were trying to escape through the back door to their detached garage, a strange man barged in through the home of the front door, and this is right where he set his sights on the two. Heidi had, of course, stopped to try and grab her wallet from the table next to the front door, and he busts in, and this guy is big, right? He's around 6'1", 6'2", wearing a dark hooded sweatshirt with his hood drawn tight around his face, and that's when Nick said that the man actually grabbed the barrel of his shotgun. And so the two are fighting, they're rolling around, and of course, in this physical altercation, the trigger goes off, bam! Somebody gets shot. Now, as soon as this happens, apparently the man who was the intruder had fled the scene and he's gone. Police were not really sure what to make of it, and there was an ongoing investigation, but immediately afterwards there was really no clues as to what happened, and everyone just accepted. And now Nick is a widower. And so, of course, once he gets out of the hospital, he's still very traumatized. He's trying to just accept the fact that his wife has just been shot and killed, and he's doing his best to move on with life. Obviously, Heidi's family is completely devastated that their beautiful daughter is now dead and gone. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, as life has it, Nick decides to try and move on with his life the best he can. And wouldn't you know it, only a few months after Heidi's death, Nick actually meets someone, a woman by the name of Rachel Watson. Now, he was immediately attracted to her because she was so sweet and kind and caring, and she believed that Nick was just the man of her dreams. The two hit it off so good, they had so much chemistry, and Rachel was already a person who was well liked and known in the community. She was very generous, she did a great job of maintaining positive relationships with her family and friends. Everybody around her that knew her absolutely loved her. Now, believe it or not, Nick was actually introduced to Rachel through her sister Sarah and her brother-in-law David Olson. Now, what's very interesting about this is that Sarah and David were actually very close friends with Heidi, or, Nick's first wife. And Sarah even considered herself one of Heidi's best friends. She actually vouched for Nick, describing him as a very loving, amazing, caring human being, and was an incredible husband to Heidi and would just make a great boyfriend provider. And so, of course, it wasn't long before Rachel and Nick fell in love, and everybody around them, including the entire family, was very supportive. And only 2 years later, the two married in August of 2012, only a little over 2 years after Heidi had perished. Shortly after getting married, they moved into a house that was bought for them by Nick's parents. A wedding gift, you could say, a darn fine good one, actually. Now, a few months later, they would welcome their first child. Now, of course, at this point, everything seemed to be going great for Nick. Even though he had to deal with the trauma of his first wife dying, things were finally looking up for him, and their future looked very bright. However, though, just the nature of what had happened, there was a lot of suspicion that hung over Nick, but Rachel stood by him, believing that he was innocent and that they were truly attacked by some unknown invader that had shot with them. At this point in time, they would go on to have 2 beautiful children. They had a perfect life, or at least what seemed like it from the outside. They were a loving, caring family. However, folks, not everything stays as it is, because Rachel began having doubts about Nick's innocence in Heidi's case. In fact, her suspicions were aroused when she found a foreclosure notice for their home due to unpaid property taxes. She couldn't understand why Nick hadn't paid the taxes. I mean, this was a guy who was always, or at least appeared to be, very responsible with money, making sure bills and necessary things are always paid on time and that things are always budgeted correctly. But when she found this notice that had clearly been hidden away, it kind of made her start to question everything she thought she knew about Nick. Now, already Nick and Rachel had a very interesting setup. You see, they would send their mortgage payments directly to Nick's parents, while Nick himself would handle the property taxes and would pay them straight to the county. Rachel's thoughts suddenly shifted to the tragic end of Heidi. And as a matter of fact, things got worse when she discovered that Nick had been told in June of 2009 that their home was actually foreclosed, and it was then sold in a sheriff's auction the same month. This was followed by eviction proceedings, and this was filed in February of 2010. And there was even an eviction hearing that was held on March 8th, 2010, which apparently Nick attended alone by himself. Now, that's weird. If Nick and Heidi were so close, why wasn't Heidi there with Nick? Apparently, the lockout date was originally set for April 9th. Now, Nick requested to move it to April 26th, claiming his grandmother was in hospice. However, things are starting to look weird now, because investigators would later find out that there was no evidence at all to support his claim. Now, as the story begins to unwrap and unfold, Rachel is clearly becoming more fearful and suspicious due to all of Nick's inconsistencies in his story. Now, this led her to share her concerns with Sergeant Sipes. And due to this new information, it prompted a fresh look at the Heidi Firkus case. Now, already going back to the original date of Heidi's death, police were originally skeptical of Nick's story. You know, that somebody had broken in and shot him in the thigh and then shot her. It's just the crime scene did not match his personal account of the events that took place. There were no obvious signs of a struggle or even a forced entry. I mean, hell, the front door was undamaged and Heidi's wallet was still there on the table. Now that's weird. Nick's story was further scrutinized when the police discovered that the couple was on the verge of losing their home. Apparently, they were several months behind on their mortgage payments, and Nick at the time was facing foreclosure. Now, Nick would later admit that they were planning to move out that day, and that they had planned to pack up their belongings and store them in some garage, and that their plan was just to go and stay with a friend until they found a new place to live. In fact, Nick would tell them that they had not told anybody about their financial woes or their impending eviction. In fact,
and this is a hard place for us. We foreclosed on our house. Okay, we have to be out by Monday. Tomorrow.
He told investigators that they were planning to tell their parents and friends later that same day. And so the police were very confused by this, and they're trying to ask more questions to figure out what was going on. So was the intruder a figment of Nick's imagination? Was he simply trying to cover up a tragic accident? Or was there a darker side to the story, something more that met the eye? The investigation was just beginning. Now, the police, of course, at this point began really digging deeper into the couple's life. And it was here, guys, they found out that Heidi apparently was completely unaware of their financial troubles. Now, already this is getting really suspicious. She was under the impression that they were moving because their landlord was actually selling the house. She had no idea they were well on their way to being evicted. Now, police also discovered that Heidi was actually scheduled to work on Monday, April 26th, and that she had not requested the day off like Nick would imply with his side of the story. Now, of course, this is very unusual because if they were planning to move out that day, she clearly would have taken the day off. right? Well, the police found text messages on Heidi's phone 3 days before her death on Thursday, April 22nd, 2010, and apparently she had made plans with a friend to get a pedicure on Sunday, April 25th. She was actually given the option to do it on Sunday or the following Wednesday. She chose Sunday. And so, looking at all this information, the police are completely puzzled. Things don't look so great for Nick, and if they were planning to move out that day, why would Heidi not take the day off the following day, and why would Heidi make plans to get a pedicure? The pieces were simply not fitting together, and the investigation was far from over. Now, doing some more digging, the police actually found out that Nick had taken out a $1 million life insurance policy on Heidi just 6 months before her death. The policy was taken out in October of 2009, and Nick was the sole beneficiary. Now, police were very suspicious at this point. Why would a young, healthy, vibrant, beautiful woman need such a large life insurance policy? Now, the police also discovered at this time that Nick wasn't so neat and clean. As a matter of fact, folks, he had a criminal record. Apparently, back in 2004, he had been convicted of theft for stealing over $7,000 worth of merchandise from his employer at the time, which was Best Buy. And at that time, he was sentenced to 90 days in jail and was ordered to pay restitution. And so now at this point, police were looking at Nick as not just a possible suspect, but probably the only suspect. They firmly believed that he had a motive to take out his wife, collect the insurance policy, pay off debts, and go off living his life scot-free under the guise that somebody had broken into the house and had shot him and killed his wife. And so now at this point, the entire investigation is focused on Nick. Now, of course, they had pulled up the previous 2 911 calls made back on April 25th, 2010. Now, what's odd is during the intruder, there were no background noise to suggest that or even a struggle. And this was very strange and made Nick look even more suspicious. And then, of course, there was the gun itself, the shotgun that was apparently used to shoot Nick and kill his wife. Now, what's really interesting to me is that it only had one set of DNA on it, and that, guys, was Nick himself. Now, already this is a huge red flag. To top it off, several witnesses in and around the neighborhood confirmed to the police that there were no signs of a break-in. However, later on, Nick's lawyers had their own theory. You see, they argue that the intruder was wearing gloves and was in the house for just a few seconds. This, they claimed, was why there was no DNA evidence anywhere. And so, of course, Nick took their advice and hired a good defense attorney by the name of Joe Friedberg. Now, Friedberg advised him to stop all contact with the St. Paul PD, and Nick Firkus, under the guidance of his legal counsel, even decided to turn down the investigators' proposal to collaborate with a police sketch artist. And that's a little weird. Now, Friedberg, aware of the potential for this to be used as a means to further question Firkus, suggested an alternative narrative. Friedberg's suggestion to Nick was that they get their own sketch artist and then bring in a sketch from there. So that's exactly what they did, and they returned to the St. Paul's PD, not empty-handed, folks, but with their own sketch of the supposed intruder. Now, here's what's interesting. Is according to Firkus, the man was in his late 30s and was dressed in a hoodie. The police in turn made the sketch very public through various media outlets, hoping that it might lead to some useful tips and that, you know what, maybe Nick was telling the truth this whole time. Maybe this whole thing had just been some giant misunderstanding. But the police were not convinced by Firkus's sketch. They believed he was simply trying to mislead them. So they decided to conduct a polygraph test on Nick, and of course the results were inconclusive. Now, this did not help Nick's case because the police were now more suspicious of him than ever before, but there was no smoking gun, no pun intended, that would seal the deal. Now, Nick's lawyers would argue that the polygraph test was completely unreliable, and they would point out further that Nick was under a lot of stress at the time, and that could very well affect the end results. They would even argue that the police were biased against Nick. They also claimed that the police were ignoring other potential suspects and that going after Nick, the ex-husband, the widower, was the easy way out to close the case. In fact, one such suspect was Michael Pye. A woman had identified him to the police as a potential match. Now, the police then began investigating him immediately, thinking that they now had a great lead, because apparently this man had a history of breaking into homes in and around the St. Paul area around 6 in the morning, just like Nick's story would tell. But the issue is that Pye was in jail on the day of Heidi's murder, so how does that work out? The police would then clear him of any involvement in the case. I'm sure you guys can see where this is going. Now, it wasn't long before Nick's second wife, Rachel, would divorce him in 2019. With everything piling up against Nick, she had been living in fear and began to really suspect that Nick was hiding something. She even went as far as to send their children away and record their conversations. In fact, in one such recording, Rachel confronted Nick about his lies, expressing her fear that he too could harm her. Rachel's decision to confront Nick and her subsequent divorce was a true turning point in the case.
The fact that you're lying was so easy for you to do in front of me over and over and over makes me think
That I could murder my wife.
that you could lie about something.
That I could murder my wife.
Yes.
She would later reveal to the media that when she caught Nick in a lie, it's what truly made her view of the 2010 event change completely. And that fear had been gnawing at her until it finally clicked that she believed he was the one who killed her. May 2021, Nick Firkus is arrested and charged with the murder of his first wife, Heidi Firkus. Now, in the case of Nick, which began in February of 2022, the defense and prosecution would present contrasting arguments. The defense would insist that Heidi, Nick's wife, was aware of their looming eviction foreclosure. But the prosecution, however, would paint a completely different picture. They claimed that Heidi was kept in the dark by her husband, who was in a state of desperation and humiliation. And so the investigation into the couple's correspondence and financial documents found at their residence did not provide any evidence to support the claim that Heidi was aware of the eviction. Now, the complaint against Nick further emphasized this point. It would state that Nick had not packed a single item, indicated that he had not informed Heidi about their imminent eviction scheduled for April 26th. Now remember, this was just a day after she was killed, and detectives had thoroughly examined and gone through all forms of their digital communication, looking and sifting through countless text messages, emails, looking for any hint of the foreclosure eviction. But they came up entirely empty-handed. There was not a single message between the couple or their contacts that would allude to any such financial trouble or the need to find a new place to live. Now, this further made it seem to everybody that Nick had just faked the entire thing and had shot himself and killed his wife in order to play this story off and to hide his embarrassment of the foreclosure. As a matter of fact, police would find an email written from Heidi to a friend that dated only a month and a half prior on March 11, 2010, when she expressed her desire to move, but saying that she felt tied down to their current home. Now, this doesn't really sound like someone expecting to be evicted, does it? Apparently, the law firm that was responsible for the foreclosure and eviction process also had zero interaction with Heidi. All their dealings, paperwork, phone calls, interactions, it was solely with Nick Firkus, which further supports that Heidi was completely intentionally kept in the dark about their dire financial situation. Even when investigators would talk to Heidi's friends and family and colleagues, none of them ever once mentioned or recalled Heidi talking about an eviction or a foreclosure or needing to find a place to live quickly or somewhere to store their belongings. It was just strange. It seems that Nick was the only one aware of their impending financial crisis. And on February 10th, 2023, After an 11-day trial, the jury took only a few hours to reach their final verdict. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is that Nick Firkus was found guilty of murdering his wife, Heidi. The prosecutors from Ramsey County, assisted by Senior Assistant Hennepin County Attorney Rachel Craker, would paint this grim picture of a man who would literally do anything to maintain his reputation at any cost, even if it meant taking a bullet wound or killing his wife. The utter shame of impending eviction and the fear of his lies being exposed drove this man to commit the unthinkable. As it turns out, ladies and gentlemen, the real fear wasn't just him losing his house, but was that his wife, family, friends, and community would all discover his thick, entangled web of lies. So I want to know what you guys think. Was justice appropriately served? Did Nick get what he had coming to him? Or was there truly an intruder and Nick just happened to take the fall? And of course, guys, because we are dealing with the tragic loss of human life, love and support to Heidi's family and everyone affected by this horrific case, my hope is that in making these kinds of videos, we can bring awareness to these kinds of events going on. If you guys enjoy this kind of content and want to see more true crime and unsolved mysteries, be sure to go ahead and smack that like and subscribe button, and I will see you guys in the next video.